In the history of drinking with dead people, we visited a lot of folks, met a lot of new friends, if you will. Some interesting people nonetheless, too. That's always kind of good. And hence the title of this channel and show is Drinking with Dead People, where we are hanging out presumably with a dead person, a grave, if you will. Not this time. One of the earliest examples that you'll see on this program, we're not necessarily drinking with a dead person as we are with a rock. Does it not make any sense? No, I wouldn't expect it to. The point is, we're going to be spending time at a cenotaph, which is a marker about somebody's life and their death. And the story behind it is absolutely fantastic. Join us as we go drinking with an explorer and an expeditionary individual. Right here, Drinking with Dead People.
Every stone marks a story. Interesting stories, people like you and I. History that should be recounted. Here we toast those you may or may not know who have gone on before us and left behind their tales to be told. Here we'll be drinking with dead people.
This is the story of a guy who lived an incredible life, as short as it was. He's not here. I'm talking about Richard Halliburton. He was born in Brownsville, Tennessee, just up the road from here. His family moved to Memphis at some point, relatively young, and Richard attended school with his brother at MUS, Memphis University School. It was a private high school, but it was more for advanced students. He did pretty well. He showed an aptitude for writing and literature. And it was there he began to develop a wanderlust, a chance to see the world. Like everybody else in the early 1900s, there was always the fascination of, and it is today, of what's out there. What can we find that is out there? What is worth seeing and what is worth doing? Well, eventually he wound up at Princeton, where he studied more in literature and journalism. And about halfway through his education there at Princeton, he decided that it would be a pretty decent idea to go on a trip, and he did. With a couple of friends, he headed to Central America, where he swam the Panama Canal. Not by boat, he actually got in the water and swam from one end to the other. Crazy. He holds the record to this day for paying the smallest toll, 39 cents. It's a great story. But what that did is it really fostered that wanderlust. And thus, after he finished Princeton, he was out on the road. He flew all over the world with a friend of his that was a pilot. Well, they couldn't fly across any of the oceans at the time, so they would box the plane up in crates and put it on a ship. He wound up starting in Europe, and he flew all over the place. And while they were looking at things and writing stories about them and getting syndicated columns published in papers to help make some money, the pilot on this trip was out making a couple of extra bucks doing aerobatic shows for the onlookers down on the ground and looking at, maybe giving some people a ride here and there just so they can say they'd flown in an airplane piloted by some crazy American. He would travel into India. He would go to Russia. He would go to Eastern Europe. He would go to the Arctic. He traveled literally all over the world. And as his writing skills developed, he would submit these articles for sale back to these newspapers, and they were syndicated and printed in journals all over the place. And along the way, he wrote some books, and some of them became rather famous, as did he. And he would go home back here or back to Princeton, and he would continue lecturing, which is what he really wanted to do. And he got paid for a lot of that. And he also got paid to write his articles and his books. They were so popular that ultimately he got called on by Hollywood, who said they'd like to option some of those books for film. A couple of them were made. They were fictionalized, of course, and the truth was a little more scattered, which really didn't need to, because Richard Halliburton was really sampling all the world's treasures and delights. Ultimately, he began to fall out of favor just by time. He didn't travel a whole heck of a lot. He still wrote, he still lectured, but he wasn't as famous or as popular as he was. So he decided on an audacious plan, actually more exhibitionism as it was to adventurism. You see, in 1939, the plan was, in San Francisco's Treasure Island, they had planned to have an exhibition on the treasures of the Orient. And he thought this would be a really neat idea to go to Hong Kong, get a Chinese junk, you're familiar with those boats, and sail it across the Pacific Ocean into Treasure Island in San Francisco and show all the onlookers what he had brought back from China. Well, he goes there, and while he is there, he did shopping around for a boat. None of them were seaworthy enough to even attempt a Pacific crossing, so that wouldn't happen. Ultimately, he pulled together some resources and some money and had one custom built. It was 75 foot long, and he even acquired the possibility of getting a diesel engine from Buick at the time, until Buick found out that the boat was actually called a junk, and Buick didn't want their product associated with junk. Nevertheless, time marches forward. The boat gets built, a motor is acquired, and they're ready to take it out. Bad luck would happen in the shakedown voyage. The captain would break his leg at some point. I think it was more specifically his ankle. There were crew members that got sick. They had to turn around and they came back to Hong Kong and make repairs and make changes. Once those changes were made, out they went. This time, they were dead set and landing in Treasure Island in San Francisco. It would make stops along the way, of course, because that's not one of those trips that you could do all at one time. And one of those stops was Midway Island. So on their way across to make the time, they were approaching Midway Island when they also approached a typhoon. That typhoon was a monster. 40-foot swells were reported by other vessels in the area at the time. The Sea Dragon, the name of the boat, the junk that Richard and his crew had, was hurting pretty badly. So much so, 1,200 miles west of Midway, the Sea Dragon broke apart and never made it to the island. It was presumed as such because over time, even after that typhoon, there was bits of wreckage floating in the water, presumably from the Sea Dragon. All hands lost, including our intrepid explorer himself, Richard Halliburton. Of course, he's not buried here. As it says on his stone, lost at sea. It's the death of an explorer. It's sort of romantic, isn't it? You hear of stories of modern day explorers like Thor Heyerdahl and Sir Edmund Hillary, men of that ilk, and this man here, Richard Halliburton, whose journals, his books, and his articles are all out there to see and to read, and to hold to you those dreams of what life is like on other far-flung places across the world. And for that fantastic story, here's to Richard. Can you imagine a life lived in 39 years that a lot of us will never encompass if we had 100 more years on top of that? So to Richard, wherever you may be, lost at sea, we'll drink to you and your adventures. Be sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel for more of this content, and join us next time as we wander among the headstones of history and go drinking with dead people.